So, welcome to this Bible study tonight. We're going to do the Bible study on being prepared. And so I wanted to do this because I felt like we're in such an unknown time right now with COVID-19 swirling around. Some people going back to work, some people not going back to work. Is it safe to be out? There's just, this unknown going on that quite frankly, our world just was not prepared for. And so I thought, well, it'd be a good idea for us to look through what it looks like to be biblically prepared and what that does for us. We prepare ourselves for a lot of things in life. We prepare like for babies coming. We prepare that nursery. We have baby showers that help us get these things that maybe we weren't quite sure that we would need, but others who have gone before us know. So that helps us prepare. We prepare for when we go to interviews. We get dressed up. We wear the appropriate clothes. We've corrected our resume so that it's fit to the task, so it's appropriate. We prepare when we go on vacation. We map out where we're going, what roads we might want to take. Sometimes we just head off on a whim, but we usually got something with us, some money in our pocket, or some sort of clothing to wear because we got it. We want to be prepared for what might come along the way. Farmers prepare their fields for the seasons, for which depending on what crop they want to grow. We prepare our houses for guests coming over. We prepare for holiday dinners. We get prepared, and preparing always helps us to understand to better be able to react in the situation of the known. Right? When we prepare. Typically, it's for what we know is coming, and so that helps us better respond in the moment for what we're known. But being prepared also helps us for the unknown. The more prepared we are in the known, the better we are capable of handling what is unknown. Being prepared for the known helps with the unknown. And so I thought today we would go through this idea of what it means to be prepared, because as Christians, we often hear about how we're supposed to rely on our faith. We walk by faith, not by sight. That's very true. We do. And so what is the part where we rely on God, and what is the part where it's okay that we're relying on ourselves? Because truthfully, in our faith, we're often taught that we're not relying on human hands, we're relying on the work of God. And that's always true, especially in the work of salvation. There's no work of the human hands there. But there are situations in which God has asked us to be responsible for what we are capable of doing. So we're going to look at that. So the question is, what is our responsibility versus where do we depend on God in our faith? And so hopefully as we work through this, we'll begin to bring that to light and we'll be able to see it. For today, our working definition of prepared is it's going to be moving on the knowledge or tasks that God has given us. It's responding to the knowledge that God has already brought before us, or it's or it's doing the task in which He's asked us for, or made clear that we should do, that kind of effect. And so I thought it'd be awesome. Let's look at Joseph, and we're going to look at Hezekiah. Joseph and Hezekiah are two people who were responding to their surroundings, but they were doing it both in preparedness and in with their own preparedness, but also with their faith. And both of their situations have some similar things, but very different in the outcomes and everything of what went on. And so I really wanted to dive into that. So we're going to start with Joseph. Joseph's the most familiar to us, I would imagine. We're very familiar with his Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? There's been movies, there's been musicals, there's been cartoons, there's been all sorts of media made about Joseph. Not so much about Hezekiah, but about Joseph. There's quite a bit out there, so we're familiar with that. Joseph takes place in Genesis chapter 30 through 50. It covers chapter 30 on out for the entire book of Genesis. But where it really picks up with the story that we're most familiar with is in Genesis 37. And so that's where we're going to pick up. In Genesis 37, verses 3 through 4, this is the part where Joseph gets his coat from his dad. Jacob loves Joseph more than the others, and this begins this envy process that his brothers have with him. They become very envious of Joseph straight from the get-go. Genesis 35, 5 through 11, Joseph has his dreams, and he talks about how his dreams about the stocks bowing, his brother's stocks bowing down to his stocks. And so you can imagine his brothers were furious at this point, and they were just like, I can't believe you think that we're going to bow down to you someday. And then the stars and the moon and the sun, and how the stars bowed down to Joseph. And even his father was confused by this. He was like, you really think that your mother and I are going to bow down to you someday? So there was a lot of questioning going around in Joseph's life. And if you think about if you've ever been questioned, especially by those that you feel that should love you the most, it always brings in this a little bit of hurt, a little bit of confusion into yourself, knocks down that confidence a little bit. But nevertheless, Joseph had these dreams, and he was confident that in what they were about. So then we move on to later down in chapter 37, verses 12 through 36. And then we see his brothers plotting to kill him. They're so furious with him. Reuben talks him out of that. Reuben says, no, let's throw him in a well. So they throw him in a well, then they fish him back out of a well, and they sell him off into slavery. And they even make some money on him. Then they go and they get his colored coat, and they pour goat's blood on it, and they take it home, and they even cause Jacob grief and hurt and pain for many, many years because of their jealousy and their anger towards Joseph. Then we move on into Joseph's life, and he's sold into slavery, becomes Potiphar. He becomes becomes a slave in his master's house, who is Potiphar. And we're going to pick up there at 39, verses 2 through 4. Say, the Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So right away, Joseph comes from being a slave into someone who's still doing slave work, but even becomes a little more responsible. But what happens over time, if you're familiar with the story, is Potiphar's wife kind of has the hots for Joseph. Joseph was a good-looking man. The Bible says that he was a good-looking guy, had a good, nice build. And Potiphar's wife, I guess, quite frankly, wants to know Joseph in the biblical sense, and then he gets accused of rape because he refuses her. He leaves his coat in his room. He runs out, and she hangs onto his coat till Potiphar comes home. And Potiphar's wife then says, "Joseph tried to rape me." And what happens is we're going to pick up at Genesis 39:20b. The second half of 20, verse 23, it says, but while Joseph was, sorry, I got ahead of myself. And of course, when Potiphar comes home, he has Joseph sentenced to prison, to life in prison for the rape of his wife, which didn't happen. So Joseph goes through this issue of being falsely accused and ends up in prison. But while Joseph was there in prison, this is verse 21, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, but because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So Joseph now, with the help of God, has gone through this accusation of rape and has been sentenced to life in prison. And then while there, he finds favor with the prison warden, and now he's in charge of the prison. He's a prisoner, and he's in charge of the prison. It's the craziest thing. It's mind-blowing if you think about it. God is with Joseph. Once again, you hear God was with him. This is twice in the same chapter that through trial, we've heard that Joseph had God with him. We're going to pick up in a minute in verse 4, in chapter 41. In chapter 40, the prisoners have their dreams. The cupbearer and the baker works out good for the cupbearer. He goes back into the service of the king of the Pharaoh. The cupbearer is beheaded, and the birds come and peck out his eyes. The dreams came true, just as Joseph said. Move on to verse 41. Pharaoh has dreams. And so Pharaoh's confused, and he's had all the wise men come in, and no one can tell him what his dreams mean. And then the servant, the cupbearer, remembers, oh wait, when I was in prison and you were angry and had me imprisoned, there was a man who interpreted dreams, and all of his dreams came true exactly how he said. So Pharaoh says, let's get him in. So they bring Joseph in, and Pharaoh explains his dreams to Joseph, and his dreams are about the corn stalks coming out healthy, or the corn stalks, the wheat stalks coming up, the grain coming up healthy, and then 7 of them being wilted, and the 7 healthy cows coming on the banks, and then 7 skinny cows coming and devouring the healthy cows. And here's what Joseph says. He says in verse 28 of chapter 41, he says, "It is just as I said to Pharaoh, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt." Verse 30, "But 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe." This is verse 32. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh 2 times is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and this is what God will do. So Joseph at this point has relayed to Pharaoh what he believes that the dream means. At this point, Joseph has a choice to make. He's given his responsibility to the Pharaoh. All he has to do is say, "There it is," and he can walk away. But that's not what Joseph does. Joseph responds in a different manner. He responds out of his faith, because who in the world is he to question the Pharaoh? He's a Hebrew slave prisoner. And who is he, not to question Pharaoh, but to instruct Pharaoh on what he should do next? But that's exactly what Joseph does. He starts to tell the Pharaoh what the Pharaoh needs to do. Verses 33 through 36. "And now let Pharaoh look," this is Joseph speaking, "and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food in these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. The food should be held in a reserve for the country and to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." So see, God spent a lot of time prepping Joseph. God spent all of the time from the moment that we enter the story in 37. It's time of God preparing Joseph. Joseph's life wasn't perfect under any circumstances by anyone's imagination. He was hated and despised by his family. His life was threatened. He was thrown in a well to die, and then he was sold into slavery, and then he was falsely accused of rape, and then he was sentenced to life in prison. Yet he was always able to see that God's hand was on him. He was always able to understand. He never forgot, God is with me. In every terrible turmoil situation, he also was able to see the good. God continually blessed Joseph through his trials and was continually preparing and teaching Joseph through them. It reminds me of Romans 8:28. Romans 8:28 reminds us that all things work for the good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. It's a great reminder that we don't always understand the situation that's going on around us. Currently, we don't understand this COVID-19 situation going on around us. We don't understand why it's happening. We have lots of questions of what's going on, and we even have lots of questions about our response as a nation and our responses as communities to it. Why are we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? A lot of questions going on, but God's hand is with us all the way. God never is turning his back on us. And we got to remember that that he's with us, and all things do work for the good. We have to wait sometimes. We don't like to do that. And sometimes we have to act in uncomfortable situations. We don't often like to do that. But regardless, God is with us. And in this situation, through God's preparing of Joseph, Joseph was able to save Egypt by being a prepper. Quite frankly, God is a prepper. God prepared Joseph, just like he's preparing me. He's preparing you and has been your entire lives to mold you and make you who he wants you to be. And he's putting you in the place exactly where he wants you to be to do some specific work that he wants you to do. It may be inside ministry. It may be in a secular job, but it's no less important. Either way, God's hand is on you, and he's got a purpose in that hand on you. So God himself is a prepper. He's prepping you, and that makes him a prepper. He prepped Joseph, and Joseph became a prepper, and he took the knowledge. Remember our working definition of prepared, moving on the knowledge that God has given us, or a task that God has given us. And Joseph is moving on the knowledge that God had given to Pharaoh, and he used that knowledge to prepare for the coming trial. And so Joseph, he didn't wait for God to do a miracle or to save Egypt by his hand like he had done before through the plagues. God never told Joseph to do what Joseph did. He never said, Joseph, now and this, now after you interpret the dream, what you're going to need to do is tell Pharaoh what he needs to do. That's not what that's not what God did. Joseph saw what he was capable of doing that God had given him, and then he did it. It was his responsibility. He had the information and the know-how, and so he had the audacity to stand up to the Pharaoh and said, Pharaoh, this is what you should do. God never does anything in the rest of this story. In the rest of this story, God sits back and lets things unfold. He never comes in and saves the Egypt from this famine. Because Joseph's response and preparedness, God doesn't have to do anything. As a matter of fact, God has so prepared Egypt, it says that the other countries around Egypt are in such famine that they have to come to Egypt, and Egypt has enough in their storehouses to even supply the surrounding nations with food. That is being prepared. God showed Joseph what was necessary, or not was necessary, but what was going to happen, and Joseph responded in his own capabilities and his own ability and did what was necessary, and as a result saved not only himself and his nation, and Egypt as a nation, but also his family. As you know, the rest of the story of his brothers and family do come and bow down before him, because he is the second in command, just under Pharaoh, and essentially in this time period, he was number one in command because Pharaoh didn't really tell him to do anything It's a great moment where we remember that he took what God had shown him through his trials and didn't complain, but rather allowed God to teach him, so that in moments where it was needed, he was able to bring up that preparedness that God had done him and use it to prepare and move forward through what God had given him, the information God had given him. So you think about that in our days. What information do we have about COVID-19, and how do we prepare ourselves? And really, when I look at this situation, I'm thinking, well, gosh, as a nation, we were totally unprepared for this. As individuals, as communities, and as an incomplete entire nation, we were totally unprepared for this. What are we going to do in response to COVID-19 so that we're better prepared to what's going to come, or what can come, or eventually, if we as Christians, we believe in Revelations, we know what's going to come, so eventually what will come. What is our responsibility in that versus what there's parts of it we have no control over, and what can God do? And you might say, well, Derek, in Joseph's story, that's good, and I hear what you're saying, but in Joseph's story, he had a dream, and God told him specifically what was coming, so he did have some cheats into knowing how to handle. That's true, but that makes it no less important of Joseph stepping up to do what he needed to do to be prepared. And so this is where the story of Hezekiah, I think, is very important. We come in to Hezekiah, and we're going to see in his story, we are going to read a lot of this, because in Hezekiah, there's not as much familiarity with the story, I imagine. And so we are going to read a lot of Hezekiah. Hezekiah's story starts in 2 Chronicles. And in 2 Chronicles, we're going to start on chapter 32, but before that, what we've seen happen is that Hezekiah has gotten Jerusalem back on track. The people of Jerusalem has begun to worship false gods. They've got temples in their homes and in their communities, and they're just worshiping false gods and everything. And Hezekiah came in and he destroyed all the temples, all altars, all the false gods, and he brought the people back out of idol worship and back into serving God. He set up one temple, one altar to offer sacrifices to Jesus or to God, and he made that the staple. And then beyond that, he started requiring them to bring 1/10 of their 1/10 of what they had again before the Lord for an offering, and he required this 1/10 sacrifice, and the people responded, and they were hugely blessed as a result. And we find out in this story is similar to what Joseph did with storing up grain. They have so much offering in abundance to the Lord, they have so much surplus to the Lord that they had to build storehouses in order to store what they were going to sacrifice to God as an offering. But something sinister is coming. And so remember, there's no prep or no pre-knowledge that this is coming. We're going to pick this up in 2 Chronicles 32, verse 1. Chapter 32, verse 1. It says, after Hezekiah did all these things, all the things that we just spoke about, to serve the Lord, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and attacked Judah. Now, Judah is Jerusalem is one of the cities in Judah. He and his army surrounded and attacked the strong walled cities, hoping to take them for himself. And so what we see is Hezekiah knew that Sennacherib had come to Jerusalem to attack it, or was coming to Jerusalem to attack it. So Hezekiah and his officers and armies and commanders, they decide to cut off water. This is literally what it says. We'll just keep reading. We'll read 2 through 8. Hezekiah knew that Sennacherib had come to Jerusalem to attack it, so Hezekiah and his officers and army commanders decided to cut off the water from the springs outside the city. So the officers and commanders helped Hezekiah. Many people came and cut off the springs in the stream that flowed through the land. They said, the king of Assyria will not find much water when he comes here. Then Hezekiah made Jerusalem stronger. He rebuilt all the broken parts of the wall and put towers on it. He also built another wall outside of the first one and strengthened the area that was filled in on the east side of the old part of Jerusalem. He also made many weapons and shields. So now we've got this scenario where Hezekiah has watched what's happening around him. He sees that King Sennacherib has come and destroyed all these surrounding cities. And he knows, hey, ultimately, this is inevitable. There's not been a prophet that's come to tell him anything. He's had no dreams. He's had no visions. And he said, I got to take care of business. So we pick up in verse 6. Hezekiah put army commanders over the people and with them at an open place near the city gate. Hezekiah encouraged the people, and he speaks to the army, and he says, be strong and brave. Don't be afraid or worried because of the king of Assyria or his large army. There is a greater power with us than with him. He has only men, but we have the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. The people were encouraged by the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. And you just look at everything that Hezekiah has done. Again, like I said, he had no visions, no dreams of warning, no prophet to tell him what would happen. He's observed what's been happening and sees what's to come, and he responds with what he's capable of doing. He responds. It's almost like he thinks to himself, I'll do what I can, and I'll let God do what only God can. I'll do what I'm capable of. God's given me the ability to reinforce my walls, to protect my people. God's given me the capacity to think and say, it'd be good if we cut the streams off. This will help save our people and help limit their ability to continue to fight. God says, God's given me the know-how to build more weapons, more shields for my people to fight. This is what God's given me the ability to do. So I'd be foolish not to respond and do what God has given me the capability of doing. And so Hezekiah does that. That's exactly what he does. And then, in his full understanding that I'm capable of reinforcing walls, building new walls, all of this, I can do what I do, he still says we're relying on God. He doesn't say I'm doing what I'm doing so that I can forget about my faith. He's saying I'm going to do what I'm doing in conjunction with my faith. And so what we see then is that he talks to the people and he encourages them, and he says he's got only men. The king trying to attack us only has men, but God fights on our side. And so we will rely on God's power. We will do this to reinforce us, but we will also be relying on God. It's in conjunction. My preparedness, I'm prepping for what's coming because I know it's coming around the corner, and this is what I can do, but there's parts I can't control, and I'm going to have all the faith in the world that God is going to take care of what only God can do. And we pick up the story in 2 Chronicles 32, verses 9 through 15, and here's what the king has to say about it. After this, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, sent his servants to Jerusalem. He didn't go. It'd be foolish to go right now. he's got some other business he's taking care of. He says, he sends servants to Jerusalem while he was besieging Lachish with all his forces with him. Against Hezekiah, king of Judah, and against all of Judah, we were at Jerusalem, saying, Thus says Sennacherib, king of Assyria, on what are you trusting that you are remaining in Jerusalem under siege? So clearly, King Sennacherib has obviously gotten word what they're doing, that they're refortifying the city. And so he's saying, I'm not coming to attack now. I'll deal with maybe easier cities that aren't refortifying. And he's trying to scare them off. He said, what are you waiting on? Is not Hezekiah misleading you to give yourselves over to die by hunger and by thirst, saying, The Lord our God will deliver us from the hand of the king of Assyria? Has not the same Hezekiah taken away his high places and his altars, and said to Judah and Jerusalem, You shall worship before one altar, and on it you shall burn incense? See, he's not recognizing. He's not understanding what's happening, that those were false gods. He doesn't have any understanding that King Hezekiah worships the living God and that there's a difference. But he's going to find out. So we're picking back up verse 13. Do you know what I and my fathers have done? Basically, you know what all of our ancestors have done to all of the peoples of this land? Were the gods of the nations of the lands able to deliver them from my hand? Who was there among the gods of the nations which my fathers utterly destroyed, who could deliver his people out of my hand, that your God should be able to deliver you from my hand? He's basically saying, do you not know that everybody they've all done the same thing? They've all said, oh, our God will save us, our God will save us. And he's saying none of their gods were able to save them because nobody's God is big enough than me. And that's, matter of fact, what he says, verse 15. Now, therefore, do not let Hezekiah deceive you or mislead you like this, and do not believe him, for no God of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver his people from my hand, or from the hand of my fathers. How much less will your God deliver you from my hand? Okay, so that's just through verse 15. He goes on and he continues to badmouth God, and it continues to speak in the Hebrew language so that they fully understand. He's saying your God's nothing. He's not going to be able to do anything, and you're all going to die and perish. He's taunting them, and he's saying, why in the world would you stay? He believes basically that he is God and that there's nothing or no one that can stop him. But God's people remain faithful. Remember, this is preparation and faith. They work together, not in spite of each other, but together. The people remain faithful, and at this point, Hezekiah turns to God, and he relies on his faith because he's saying, I've done all that I can do. We are now at the point where we're going to be in this battle, and only God will save us now. And so Hezekiah turns to God for what only God can do, and he prays for protection. 2 Chronicles 32, 20 and 21. But King Hezekiah and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, prayed about this and cried out to heaven. And the Lord sent an angel who destroyed every mighty warrior, commander, and officer in the camp of the king of Assyria. That's it. In the blink of an eye. Could have been in the blink of an eye. Could have lasted for hours. The Bible doesn't really specify how long that situation took. But you see, the angel has come down, and he took care of this army. Hezekiah has relied on what he was capable of doing and did it, and responsibly so, because that's what he was able to do. But he is completely in full faith, not dismissing his faith, relying on the Father, the King of all, God of gods, Lord of lords, King of kings, to take care of the situation that he can't. Hezekiah never dismisses his faith because of his own preparations. He simply takes responsibility for what he's capable of, nor is he fully reliant on his own capabilities. He acknowledges all along that God is their ultimate weapon, and he even relies on God through prayer to win the ultimate battle. But he still did what was necessary. Galatians 6, chapter 6, verse 7 says, a man reaps what he sows. It's a reminder that we do, every farmer knows this firsthand. If you put the work in, then you get the benefit of the good crop. But if you don't sow it, you don't get it. There are preparations that we can do. There are steps that we can take in every circumstance in life. And this is COVID-19 or no COVID-19. There's a responsibility we have to take care of what we can because God has blessed us with the ability to do so. It's not that we're saying, look what we did. It's we're saying, look what God is giving us the ability to do. And so therefore, we will respond to his expectation of us and do it. Remember, moving on the knowledge that God has given us or moving on the task that God has laid before us. Think about both of these stories. Does the whole thing play out differently if Hezekiah does nothing to refortify the city? Maybe Sennacherib attacks Jerusalem first, right? Maybe he comes there instead of to Lachish, and then Jerusalem falls because Hezekiah does nothing. But instead, we know that there's this pause in between what Hezekiah is doing and Sennacherib fighting somewhere else, which gives him time to taunt, which ultimately ultimately has held Hezekiah off held King Sennacherib off until the appropriate time. Joseph's story, no different. What happens if Joseph never says anything after that moment where he interprets Pharaoh's dream? If he doesn't have the audacity, the faith in God to step up and say, this is what you should do. He instructs as a slave prisoner. He instructs what the king of the entire nation should go and do. What happens if he doesn't do that? Does Egyptian fall to the famine? Do all the nations around them surrender to this terrible famine and die because the famine's coming, right? So, when you think about that, you begin to realize the importance of what these guys did with what God had given them the capability to do and expected them to do as a result. Again, still not ultimately by their hand. It was things that God had prepared them for. God had given them the ability to do. So God has given us the ability to think for ourselves. He expects us to respond in accordance to his will with those abilities. So that in 1 Thessalonians 5, 6 through 8, we don't become these people who are asleep. 1 Thessalonians 5, 6 through 8 says, others may sleep, but we should stay awake and be alert. People sleep during the night, and some even get drunk, but we belong to the day. So we must stay sober and let our faith and love be like a suit of armor. Our firm hope that we will be saved is our helmet. It's a reliance of being alert, being prepared, but putting on your faith as an armor. We should be prepared, awake, alert, to the extent that we can be. But just as Joseph and Hezekiah did, they both wore their faith as a suit of armor, allowing God to do what only God could do. And they did what God tasked them to do. Philippians 4:13 is a nice reminder. I can do all things through Christ because he gives me strength. Remember, God is with him. God is with him. That's what we're told in Joseph, in Joseph's story. God is with him. God is with him. God is with us. When we become Christians, when we ask Christ to live in our heart, that is literal. We've gone over it before in our study on the armor of God and the preparation of our mind and everything. God is with us. That screen popped up. I apologize for that. And with Christ, we have that power to do everything, including be bold and take care of the things that we need to take care of, that we are capable of, because he's giving us the ability to do so. So the question therein is, again, what will we do with our response in COVID-19 now that we've seen what can happen and we know as Christians what eventually will happen? What can we do to better respond? Do we, find ways to have some sort of supply of food so next time, and believe it or not, these are the things that the CDC and the WHO have even said, have a supply of food on hand so that when something like this happens, everybody doesn't bombard their stores and then we run out of toilet paper and the shelves are empty for days. And then we have people that are desperately in need of these things, where if we've all taken the responsibility that we can and do have, then it works out better for everybody in the long run. And that's where I wanted us to come in and talk and understand. We have a responsibility to be prepared, and we have a responsibility to act in faith. And those go together. They are not against each other. My preparedness does not negate my faithfulness. I can be prepared with what God has given me the capability to do and be reliant on God to do what only he can do. And that, I think, is the biggest takeaway of this lesson. Remember in all things Do what God has given you the ability to do. He has shown you, He has tasked you, He's made you capable. You have to respond. And then there's parts that you don't know. There's things that you won't know what to do. There's things that you won't be able to respond to. There's things that are out of your control. And that's okay too, because you've put your faith on as a suit of armor. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for your love, your mercy. I thank you so much for this example that you've given us in your word today to show us there is a responsibility that we have, God, to be prepared, but it's not in spite of our faithfulness. It does not work against our faithfulness. It's because we are faithful in you and who you are that you've allowed us the capability to do certain things, that we can do those things and we should. And God, then there's so much, Father, that we cannot do, that we cannot know. But God, we know that you do. We know that your hand is in all of that. And so, God, we pray that you have your hand on us and protect us in all of these situations, Father. That we come to you, that we come to you, Father, in our full faithful, in our full suit of armor, faithfully before you, acknowledging that we can do so much with our hands, but there's so much more that you can do with yours. And so we pray that you bless us with your will, with knowledge of your will and how to respond appropriately, that those two things work together. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Thank you. We'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to start a 3-part series on our works versus our faith. I felt like it was kind of appropriate after doing this. We'll talk about that. One week we'll look at responding to God in faith. One week we'll look at responding to God in works. And the third week we're going to talk about what those look like going hand in hand. So we'll be back on next Sunday at 6. We're going to try, as things are currently, we're going to try to meet at my house. I'll text out word about that as we get closer to that time. And I look forward to seeing you all face to face again. I miss all you. Love all y'all and can't wait to be together. May God's peace be with you all. Bye.